the Strait of Hormuz. Connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, this is the world's most critical oil choke point and arguably the most stressful 29 miles of water on Earth. It works via a massive volume funnel, handling the vast majority of exports from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar. It moves 21 million barrels per day. That is 1 in every 4 barrels of seaborne oil on the planet. No alternatives replace it, no massive workarounds, nothing to break except the flow itself. The biggest problem is that the world's most vital economic artery is essentially a narrow bathtub shared by the United States Navy and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Whenever you bring up the stability of global oil, some geopolitical analyst will show up and say, in the 1980s we had the Iran-Iraq tanker war, ships got blown up, and the world kept turning. The problem is physical, and it is immediate. The navigable sea lane is incredibly narrow. Iran controls the entire northern coastline. The U.S. Fifth Fleet patrols the water. You focus on the sheer volume of oil. The geopolitical threat blurs. You focus on the Iranian speedboats and drones threatening to seize a tanker. The global market blurs. You put a 300-meter supertanker in the lane. An IRGC drone buzzes the bridge. A U.S. destroyer radios a warning. The price of gas in Ohio goes up by 10 cents. This is the normal operating procedure. You cannot simply detour 21 million barrels of daily crude. It is the Persian Gulf's oil straw. If U.S. iron tensions boil over and that straw clamps shut, the global economy chokes. That is why every modern energy market still monitors Hormuz as its primary unavoidable baseline. Strait of Malacca. Connecting the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, this is the busiest oil choke point on Earth. Over 70% of the product here is crude oil, with China alone taking about 48% of it. The width varies from 250 kilometers down to a highly constrained 2.8 kilometers at the Singapore Strait. 29% of all seaborne oil, aligned perfectly on a maritime axis. You put the ship in the lane and sail. No detours, just localized piracy and navigation risks. Suez Canal and Bab al-Mandeb. Egypt opened the man-made Suez Canal in the 19th century. The waterway acts essentially as a geographical heads-up display, shrinking the world. It is a 193-kilometer shortcut through the desert, with step locks linking the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. The mechanism is different from an open strait. It is a highly regulated channel, handling 7 to 8 million barrels a day, about 10% of all seaborne oil. Instead of sailing around Africa, oil ships zip through Egypt to save weeks. If 100% of the window is blocked by a grounded ship, like the Ever Given in 2021, the complete flow stops and massive rerouting begins. This route has 2 elements: the canal to the north and the southern gateway, Bab al-Mandeb. This 4-kilometer wide strait is the tiny Red Sea door for Gulf oil. Put the ship through the door and they reach Europe, but the door can be shot at. Houthi missile and drone attacks since 2023, along with historic Somali piracy, provide 2 modes of risk. Block the 4-kilometer door, and the 193-kilometer canal becomes useless. Turkish Straits. Turkey regulates this narrow, winding corridor under Istanbul's skyline, carrying about 3.7 million barrels of oil per day, or 5% of seaborne trade. It uses the exact same basic principle as any other strait. Achieving connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, the standard route is highly regulated due to sovereignty concerns. The channel is illuminated by the city lights at night. No extra infrastructure required. The limitation became clear as ship sizes grew. The sharp turns and heavy traffic create a very high accident probability for large ship collisions. If it backs up, Black Sea countries lose their main sea exit. Because of this, Black Sea exports often have to shift to pipelines, like the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan for Azeri oil, to bypass Turkey entirely. Cape of Good Hope. A vast stretch of open ocean around Africa's southern tip. It magnifies transit times and distances to a degree where any other route would be preferred. Shipping fleets calculate distance, fuel drops, and weather compensation. On Precision Global Logistics, every extra mile represents millions of dollars. A cheap logistics manager tells you that you just add 10 days to the journey. The fuel bill disagrees. The long detour is the modern emergency standard. When Middle East or Red Sea routes are disrupted, volume here goes from nominal to massive, depending on global conflict. In early 2025, this detour carried 9.1 million barrels a day, a 45% surge over normal. The longer the detour, the wider the margin of error, and the more critical weather becomes. In stormy seas around the Cape, ships are buffeted like a target shimmering from heat mirage. It's the long, scenic ocean road. Slow and costly, but it gets ships through when shortcuts are blocked. Panama Canal. This emerged to solve the most obvious problem in global shipping. No one wants to sail around South America, a variable lock-based waterway that lifts roughly 2.3 million barrels per day. The locks limit vessel size, meaning mostly smaller Panamax tankers and LNG carriers use it. It functions like agent ship elevator, linking two oceans. It's the simplest idea in the world that took decades to execute well enough for real use. Because manufacturing man-made locks that maintain consistent mechanical quality across the full elevation range is extraordinarily difficult and expensive. If it fails, ships reroute around Cape Horn, which is much longer, or use U.S. Gulf to Pacific pipelines for a partial workaround. Danish Straits and Northern Sea Route. The concept is the simplest to understand and the most frustrating to use. You project Russian and Norwegian oil out of the Baltic Sea and shoot it into the global market. About 4.9 million barrels a day. An analyst understands the mechanics. The problem is geopolitics. These are the main gateways out of the Baltic Northern Pond. But EU sanctions and politics act like daylight on a laser, competing with the flow and making the route highly contested. The Northern Sea route through the Russian Arctic is the future shortcut. It can cut 40% off the Europe to Asia sailing distance, but it is dependent on external conditions. As ice melts, big ships can sail north to save time. But in intense winter, the ice competes with the ships, and the route disappears. Pipelines and overland routes. Special operations in logistics combine pipelines with port terminals to ship from unconventional positions without relying on ocean choke points. The Summed Pipeline, the East-West Pipeline, the U.S. Trans-Alaska Pipeline. The maritime route sees nothing. The overland route sees everything. There is a geographical gap between the two sides of that scenario that is difficult to fully appreciate without seeing it firsthand. The central paradox, moving oil by pipe, is theoretically faster and safer, but the most volume-dependent on external infrastructure in practice. No ocean route has that kind of gap between concept and real-world limitation. Waterways carry 70% of global oil demand. Pipelines pick up what the oceans cannot.